Imagine you are the commanding general of the most advanced air force in the Middle East. You have spent your entire career building, protecting, and expanding that force. Your pilots are among the best trained in the world. Your aircraft are the most expensive, the most capable, the most feared in the entire region. Iron Dome is active. David Sling is active. Every radar array on your northern, western, and eastern perimeters is scanning. You have been on elevated alert for days because the intelligence picture has been screaming that something is coming. You have done everything right. And then at 2:17 in the morning, in the span of 30 minutes, everything you built is gone. Not in a dogfight. Not lost in some desperate last stand over hostile skies. Gone while sitting on the ground inside hardened concrete shelters at the most heavily defended airbase in the Middle East, struck by missiles that flew over 1,000 kilometers and hit individual building coordinates with single-digit meter accuracy. 40 F-35s. Isandid all $4 billion. Israel's entire forward strike capability, destroyed before a single pilot could reach a cockpit. That is not a military setback. That is a civilizational shock. And the world woke up this morning in a reality that nobody in Washington, Tel Aviv, or any Gulf capital had actually prepared for, despite all the warnings that were sitting in plain sight for years. Let me be honest with you about something before we go any further. The mainstream defense media this morning is doing what it always does in moments that break its analytical framework. It is minimizing, contextualizing, and reaching for familiar vocabulary to describe something that is genuinely unprecedented. Words like setback, escalation, incident. These words are not adequate to what happened. What happened last night is the functional equivalent of the 1967 Six-Day War, but in reverse and executed not by a military superpower with satellite constellations and carrier fleets, but by a nation that has been under crushing economic sanctions for 5 decades. A nation that Washington has been telling itself it has successfully contained. Last night, Iran proved that containment was a story Americans were telling themselves. The missile that shattered that story is called the Fath-360. And if you have never heard of it before today, that is precisely part of the problem we need to talk about. To understand what Iran actually did last night, you need to understand what Nevatim Air Base means to Israel's entire regional strategy. This is not simply an airfield with aircraft parked on it. Nevatim is the operational center of Israeli military power projection across the entire Middle East. Every major airstrike Israel has conducted against Iranian weapons infrastructure in Syria over the past several years flew out of Nevatim. Every penetration of defended airspace, every precision strike against Hezbollah manufacturing facilities, every covert mission that required low observable aircraft capable of reaching targets without triggering radar detection, it all originates from Nevatim. The F-35I Adir fleet based there is not just hardware. It is the instrument that makes Israel's entire deterrence posture credible. It is the reason Hezbollah calculates the cost of escalation the way it does. It is the reason Iran has moved its most sensitive assets underground and dispersed them across its territory. Because Israel has the aircraft that can reach them, find them, and destroy them. Without the F-35 fleet, that entire logic collapses. Iran did not just destroy aircraft last night. Iran destroyed the mathematical foundation of Israeli deterrence. The timing of the strike was itself a statement of how deeply Iran understands Israeli operational patterns. The launch window at 2:17 in the morning was selected based on years of careful intelligence collection about Israeli air defense cycle rhythms. Watch rotations had just changed. Radar station personnel were at their overnight processing minimums. The human alertness in the system was at its lowest point in the 24-hour cycle. Iranian operational planners chose that window deliberately, and they chose it because they had the intelligence picture that told them exactly when to choose it. The opening sequence of the assault involved a mass wave of decoy UAVs, small platforms flooding the radar environment with hundreds of simultaneous signatures from multiple approach vectors. Iron Dome and David Sling batteries across northern and central Israel began cycling through target assignment sequences at a pace that exceeded their realistic reload capacity. Every available interceptor in the coverage network was being consumed by decoys. And while that consumption was happening, the Fath-360 salvos were already airborne, approaching from western Iran and from mobile launch platforms pre-positioned through Iraqi territory, coming from angles that Israeli early warning arrays were not adequately oriented to cover. By the time the command network fully understood what was actually happening, the first impacts were already registering at Nevatim. The Fath-360's terminal guidance system is the technical core of everything that happened last night, and it is worth spending real time on this because it explains something that the official statements are conspicuously avoiding. Modern missile defense architecture, Iron Dome, Dome, David Sling, the entire layered system Israel operates, is built on a foundational assumption. The assumption is that a ballistic missile follows a predictable trajectory that can be tracked, modeled, and intercepted within the available time window. That assumption is valid for conventional ballistic weapons. The Fath-360 abandons that assumption in its final descent phase. As it comes down through the terminal stage, an onboard electro-optical seeker activates and begins comparing the ground signature beneath it against a preloaded digital map of the target area. It is not following GPS coordinates in that final phase. It is looking at the actual ground, identifying specific structures, and steering itself toward a designated point on a specific building. This is why the impact pattern at Nevatim showed missiles hitting individual shelter bays rather than distributed impacts across the general base area. The weapon was not trying to hit the base. It was trying to hit specific coordinates inside specific buildings, and it did. Repeatedly, with extraordinary consistency. The GPS jamming that American and Israeli electronic warfare assets had been running continuously across the region for weeks produced zero measurable degradation in Iranian strike accuracy. Because the Fath-360 does not need GPS to kill its target. It has already seen the target before it arrives. And the salvo doctrine Iran built around this weapon compounds the defense problem exponentially. A single Fath-360 fired against a defended position faces a non-trivial intercept probability. Israel's point defense systems are real engineering achievements and should not be dismissed. But Iran was not firing single missiles. Iranian batteries were launching salvos of 8 to 12 missiles against each designated aim point, compressed into a 90-second launch window, with multiple batteries targeting the same facilities from different approach vectors simultaneously. Against a salvo of 8 missiles arriving from 2 different directions within a 30-second window, a point defense battery faces a mathematics problem that has no clean solution. It can engage some of the incoming rounds. It cannot engage all of them. And the rounds it does not engage arrive at their targets. Iranian targeting teams calculated the realistic intercept capacity of each Israeli battery in the coverage zone, the number of rounds each battery could handle within a specific time window given its reload constraints, and designed their salvo sizes to exceed that capacity by a defined margin. This is not intuition. This is applied engineering analysis of the adversary's architecture, conducted by people who had clearly spent years thinking about exactly this problem. Then there is the intelligence dimension that official Israeli statements are not addressing, which is itself revealing. The fact that Iran struck Ramon Air Base simultaneously with Nevatim, hitting the precise dispersal coordinates where Israel had pre-positioned reserve F-35s and F-16Is in the days before the strike, is a detail with enormous implications. Israel had moved those aircraft in a dispersal measure following escalation warnings. The movement was an internal operational security decision made at the command level. Iran knew where the aircraft were moved, knew the specific coordinates within Ramon where they had been relocated, and hit those coordinates with comparable accuracy to the Nevatim strikes. Whatever penetration of Israeli operational security enabled that targeting, it has not been publicly acknowledged. But the impact craters are the acknowledgement that official statements will never provide. Washington's response to all of this has been a study in institutional paralysis, dressed up as careful deliberation. The phrases that emerge from the White House, deep concern, commitment to Israel's security, calls for restraint, landed in Tel Aviv like insults. To understand why Washington is genuinely paralyzed rather than simply performing caution, you need to look at the military options available and what each one actually costs. Moving carrier strike groups closer to the Gulf to demonstrate air power presence requires accepting a risk threshold that American Naval Command just visibly declined to accept when it repositioned carriers away from the Gulf of Oman, following earlier demonstrations of Iranian anti-ship missile capability. Conducting precision strikes against Iranian missile infrastructure requires a campaign of a scale and duration that would immediately trigger the full activation of Iran's regional network, meaning Hezbollah, Houthi forces, and Iraqi militia groups all moving simultaneously. The resulting regional war is not a scenario that American military planners running honest modeling can guarantee a favorable outcome to within an acceptable cost envelope. And emergency aircraft resupply to Israel, while theoretically possible, requires pulling from active American operational squadrons and accepting reduced American air combat capacity in other theaters, while the F-35 production pipeline, running at its fastest rate in program history, works through a backlog that cannot fill a 40 aircraft gap in less than several years. The question that no Pentagon official will answer publicly, but that every serious defense analyst is asking this morning, is the one that actually matters for the next phase of this conflict. If Nevatim can be struck with this precision and this density, what does that imply for American air bases in the region? Al Udeid in Qatar, Al Dhafra in the UAE, Incirlik in Turkey. None of these are hardened facilities built to absorb concentrated precision ballistic strikes. They are conventional air bases with known coordinates, operating in the open against an adversary that just demonstrated it can hit a specific aircraft shelter bay from over 1,000 kilometers away. The silence from the Pentagon on this question is the most informative thing the Pentagon has said today. Israel entered last night as the unquestioned dominant air power in the Middle East, a status it had held without serious challenge for more than half a century. It exited last night as a nation whose air force is operating under existential constraint, whose deterrence posture has been publicly shattered, and whose adversary now controls the tempo of what comes next. The Fath-360 did not just destroy 40 aircraft. It destroyed the foundational assumption that technological superiority, American backing, and layered missile defense create a ceiling of security that no regional power can breach. That ceiling was breached in 30 minutes. And the world that exists on the other side of that 30-minute window is a genuinely different world from the one that existed before it.